This call is being recorded.
Welcome to Your Daily Writing Habit. If you are writing a book or thinking about it, or maybe you've started writing your book but you need some help getting it done, you are in the right place. Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Christine Whitmarsh. If you're looking for me online, look for Christine Inc., like that stuff we write with. Each day I'm sharing with you the writing habits I've learned over my 20 years as a ghostwriter, book coach, and author. I have found that three things in particular have a huge impact on your success as an author, and they can even turn someone who barely sees themselves as a writer into a published book author. Those three things, my pillars here on the show, are writing fundamentals, productivity, and mindset habits. And I'm so excited to have a guest on the show today, here today on Your Daily Writing Habit, to discuss intellectual property and other legal issues relevant to us as authors and creatives is attorney Kathryn Goldman. Kathryn is an intellectual property and internet law attorney who helps creative professionals protect their work so they can profit from it. She has helped countless writers, artists, and creative entrepreneurs move from early stage ideas to licensing their work or optioning their books and building their businesses. She is the editor of the website Creative Law Center. The Creative Law Center gives innovative creatives the business and legal perspective they need when making the move from artist to entrepreneur with understandable and actionable information. Welcome, Kathryn. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Christine, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it very much.
This is great. We were just talking about this, whether we call it dual-brained or mushy-brained, it all goes together, creative as well as other things. So I'm going to start with that, kind of like a chicken or the egg, meaning what came first, a passion for law or a passion for creativity? Specifically, I heard you on another podcast recently talking about all your creative pursuits like painting. So I was wondering which came first for you and how did the other passion follow suit?
So art came first. Creativity came first for me. I grew up surrounded by artists. My mom was the dean of the Maryland Institute College of Art for 26 years.
Wow.
And so there were lots of students around all the time making art. My sister is an artist. My brother is an artist. My husband is an artist. And so creativity first. When I went to college, I majored in art history. And then I got out of college and I looked around and I said, what am I going to do now? And I went to law school.
That's excellent. There's a whole story, and I'm not going to bore everybody with it now. It's in my memoir, The Power of the Curve, of how that happened with me with nursing. That's why I have the science background, because I had the writing, and I'd been trained as a writer my whole life, and I looked around and said, okay, what am I going to do with this? But people will always be sick. So very similar kind of path there. Like, how am I going to make money?
How am I going to make a living? Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then it all came together. So moving on to your specialty areas, as far as authors are concerned specifically, what is the single biggest blind spot you believe that authors have regarding kind of stepping in legal potholes, whether in your specialty, protecting their work or otherwise? So what's the single biggest legal blind spot that authors have?
The single blind spot?
Like, what are they not aware of that could hurt them? The number one thing.
So I think that's hard to answer because it really depends on who I'm talking with at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But this week, and I don't know if you've seen the article that was in the New York Times about the bad art friend. And this is a woman who used another woman's letter in her short story, and almost verbatim. And it's a big hullabaloo on Twitter, and there are like 2,000 comments on the article in the New York Times. And I think that the biggest issue is this inadvertent plagiarism, not being original. And I think that, that people have to really think about what they're doing when they use other people's creative work. And so, and I understand that, creatives borrow and use all the time. But when you do it, you have to be making something new. You have to be making something different. And it can't be, you just can't, you can't lift other people's work and just drop it in your work willy-nilly. So I think being original and being intentional when it comes to borrowing ideas or other people's work. And so I'm not going to say that that's the biggest blind spot that writers have. It's just that I have been thinking about it a lot this week because of this story that was on the New York Times. So I think that's a problem. You can't, in my view, the woman who took the letter written by this other writer and put it in her short story was operating from a position of arrogance about her writing. She thought she was better than the other writer, and therefore she could use that work. And I've just been thinking about it a lot this week. So that I'm not sure that's the biggest thing, but that's what I'm thinking about.
That's perfect, and I love how relevant it is, and that's a great story too. And you mentioned in your answer, without like making it new or making it different, or I don't know if you have an example of that. Like if you're going to, would it be just being inspired by another person's work, or I was just kind of curious what you meant by that.
So making something new and different is you can use somebody else's work. There's the fair use exception to copyright infringement. If you're taking a small portion of somebody else's work and you're making it new, you're making it different, you're transforming it into something else. The examples I can put my fingers on are more in the visual art world. But I'm trying to think of in the literary scenario. Oh, for instance, here we go. And you may have heard me talk about this. The memoir that was written by President Gerald Ford after he left office. And he wrote about why he pardoned Richard Nixon. The book was called A Time to Heal, and the periodical, The Atlantic, got a hold of an advance copy, and they wrote a whole article about it. And they took a 300-word passage out of the book that summarized why he pardoned Richard Nixon. Okay, and they argued that because it was embedded in this whole story of the Nixon presidency and Ford ascending and all that kind of stuff, that it was really fair use just taking this little 300-word segment. And the court said, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the court said, no, you took the heart and soul of the work. Okay, you didn't transform it into something new and different. That is infringement. So transformation, you really have to move away from the original person's work. You have to not take the heart and soul of it, only take the smallest amount possible to still have your message be clear. So that's, I think, understanding fair use and when you can use somebody else's creative work is probably a blind spot.
That's excellent. That's a great example. So I'm just wondering, I know we're kind of like brainstorming here, but off the top of your head, off the top of our heads, what would have maybe been a better path for the, well, you said the Atlantic to do that if they had wanted to kind of, reference or, somehow be inspired by the heart and soul of that book? Or I'm just kind of like wondering, what would have been a better way for them to do that?
Well, instead of lifting the passage verbatim, they could have characterized it. All right? And they could have read it and then characterized what they read. They could have, because it's the Atlantic, which is, essentially opinion, they could have said that the book was called A Time to Heal, right? And so they could have talked about, and I don't remember the article. I read it years ago, but and they could have talked about what was driving the decision in their view, jumped inside Gerald Ford's head and saying, he was trying to heal the nation, and there was this great schism in the nation. And they could have characterized what they read rather than lifting the man's words.
I love that distinction, characterization versus lifting. That is great.
Mm-hmm.
And that answers one of my, I think one of the next questions I was going to ask you. So how perfect. And speaking of memoirs, as you were just talking about, that's actually my personal specialty area in book coaching and ghostwriting, memoir writing, memoir coaching. And I've seen a lot of that show up in your very excellent content, like your email newsletter, which I subscribe to, and I highly recommend others do the same. And I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes. And one question I get a lot from my memoir authors is about the spectrum, I kind of think of it as, the spectrum between keeping the memoir totally nonfiction, like naming the names, describing the events as the author remembers them, like not holding back, telling it like it is, and maybe praying that they don't get sued. And then the other end of the spectrum that I see, which I've seen authors cross over to, where they're just really afraid of saying anything, they flat out write their memoirs as novels because some of the stuff that went down in their lives, they'd just rather not risk the liability. So like I said, I think of it as the spectrum, either, tell it all, don't hold back, or just write a novel just to be safe. So are there any kind of rules of thumb a memoir author can use to navigate that middle section between those extremes?
Well, you really have the answer buried in the question. It's risk tolerance. It's how much can you stand when you put yourself out there? And it's not just litigation, right? It's the response of your family and your friends. It's the social media backlash once you put it out there. It's the response of the family and friends of the people that you write about in your story or in your memoir. And so it's really how much can you tolerate. And it's not it's a really personal question, and it's not always a legal question. But the legal piece of it is that memoirs are imperfect, right? Because by the time you're writing it, you're looking back over what happened years ago, maybe decades ago.
Yep.
So it can't be perfect, and by its very, factually perfect. And so by its very nature, it's going to be your or the writer's opinion of what happened in the past, and it's going to be their view and their interpretation of what happened in the past. And so it's in that context, as a lawyer, when I help writers of memoir clear their work in order to reduce the risk of litigation, is I look at it in that context. The memoirist is not stating a fact that could be defamatory, right? It's couched as an opinion. So defamation is one of the risks. So when you go through a memoir, you want to make sure that there aren't statements of fact that could result in litigation. The other piece to memoir is the invasion of privacy piece, right? So what makes a good memoir is revealing secrets in most cases. And those secrets could be the basis of a claim against the author. And so you want to analyze whether you are on solid legal ground by revealing those secrets. Does that person have a right to privacy for that particular secret? Now, if it's a criminal act that you're revealing, their right to privacy plummets. They don't really have a right to privacy for a criminal act. But if it's some other thing that they might have a right to privacy, then you're talking about, okay, well, what's the risk that there's going to be a claim made? So let's say the memoirist changes the names of the people in the story, but keeps her own name as the author. Well, then the people in the story are going to know who she's talking about. But the public may not know who she's
Mm-hmm.
talking about. And so that reduces risk because the person about whom she is writing doesn't want to come forward and say, oh, that's me, and you shouldn't have said these things about me, and you shouldn't have told people that I did all these things. So they're less likely to come forward in that scenario. So it's all about managing that risk. Internally, what can you take? And externally, what does your memoir look like, and how does that trigger the law?
That's excellent. And I have two immediate thoughts. First of all, memoir authors, hey, share your own inner secrets instead of other people's. Share all your own inner emotional secrets. That seems you won't sue yourself. And then my other thought is, my goodness, Prince Harry must have a very high risk tolerance.
Who? I missed the name.
Prince Harry.
Oh.
The royal family.
Okay,
I'm thinking he
okay.
must have an extraordinary. Well, he also has an extraordinarily high, legal budget, but also a very high risk tolerance. It's just kind of based on the articles I've read so far about his upcoming memoir.
Yeah. And celebrities are a whole different class of person. I mean, think of what he has been raised with.
Yes.
You know, I mean, he has just been. There is just. What could he possibly say that we really don't already know?
That's a really good point too. Yeah. Yeah. This is excellent. Oh, we could have a memoir conversation all day here, but I think I'm going to move on to the next question, which is the next question comes from one of my members of my Inc. Authors group on Facebook, and they are curious about the process and also opportunities that might come from selling the foreign rights to your book. And I'm not sure if this is a subject that you are, experienced in, but I just thought I'd ask you anyway, since it was one of the questions that people asked me to ask you.
So I have reviewed a couple of foreign rights contracts that have been brought to me by my author clients. And so, they're valuable, right? Depending on what your genre is and depending on what you're writing about, they can be valuable. I have one friend, she's not a client, but she's the author of children's books, and she's in 16 different languages.
Wow.
So I mean, she's doing she has a series, and it's doing extraordinarily well in the foreign rights area. So do not underestimate it. Now, how you end up securing foreign rights deals, I cannot speak to that. That would be something for an agent. I think you would have to talk to the agent, or the publishers also are instrumental in securing foreign rights because they lock them in the publishing contract. But don't underestimate the power of foreign rights.
That's very good information. And, based on what you've seen, have you seen that you mentioned children's book series? Are there genres that you personally observed that are more successful with obtaining foreign rights, or does it just really depend on the book and the author?
It depends on the book and the author. I think that in fiction, you're going to see thrillers are probably good in the foreign rights department, and in nonfiction, business books, books about sales and business management, they're pretty good in foreign rights, depending on the cultural issues.
Absolutely. Excellent. So thank you for that. And finally, in sync with the show theme here, of course, your daily writing habit, can you share a bit about your own creative habits, whether writing or creative or general productivity or otherwise? What habits do you have, and which ones are you working on?
So I have my productivity habit is I use I call it a journal, but it's a cross between a to-do list, a project management list, daily appointments, daily checklists, and I map out my day, and I say, okay, this is going to take me 90 minutes, and so I slot it in. So I start the day with slotting the day. So that's my productivity tool that I use. My creative pieces, I paint. I'm a watercolorist, so that's what I do creatively as an outlet. But I also consider my day-to-day work to be very creative. when I have a client that comes to me, before we got on this call, I was working with a client who was very concerned that the pieces that he was sharing with a ghostwriter
Mm-hmm.
would be used by the ghostwriter in other works.
Oh.
And so we crafted language for the contract that would make it very clear that that person could not do that. And so just the crafting of language and working with writers and artists to listen to what their concerns are and then creating contractual language or strategies that address those concerns so that they can move forward confidently to the next stage of their project. I think that's very creative. And then finally, my writing that I do, you've read my emails and blog posts, and and I put a lot of creative energy into those things as well.
And I can tell too, and I just want to put this message out for authors, for authors that are working on their brand and trying to get their name out. This is something I've had a lot of discussions with other people and colleagues lately, is content. And I know this is one of my soapbox issues here on Your Daily Writing Habit, but hey, the reason that you're all being able to hear the genius of Kathryn today and all this information that she's sharing is because she got my attention through her content. So reinforcing that message once again, authors, content, and more content. Mm-hmm. That's how you got my attention, Kathryn.
Oh, I'm glad it worked.
Yes, absolutely. And I love I think it's time boxing, what you were talking about that you do. Nir Eyal, the author, he was on the show of his book is Indistractable. He calls it time boxing, kind of what you were describing. And I've heard that's a very, very effective method. And then, I love what you said about contracts. And yes, I do remember, years and years ago, hammering out such language with my own attorney where, especially because I do such a variety of things for people. So that is definitely a creative process.
And I enjoy that. I like doing that, and I like working with people and helping them reach a more confident level in their work. And I think that's what my role is.
Excellent. And before we wrap up, would you like to tell people how to connect with you? Your website's pretty awesome, so talk about that a little bit and how you can be a resource to authors.
So the website is creativelawcenter.com, and I have a lot of resources for authors on the website. I talk a lot about copyright. I talk about how to protect your work, how to work with other people and protect your work. I have a whole section on trademark and branding on my website for those authors who are really building their author platform and how to lock in branding. I talk about trademark for book series and things of that sort. And then I have business building resources for creatives. I also offer a membership program for folks who are building their business, and we do monthly workshops, and I have a large variety of form documents that can be customized and checklists and things of that sort in the membership, which really allows me to deliver legal services at scale in an affordable manner to creatives who are, looking at every penny. So affordable and accessible is kind of my mantra.
Love that. Love those different levels. So hopefully my listeners, all the authors out there, will check out your website. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show today, Kathryn.
Christine, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I'm so happy that I discovered your podcast. I love listening to it in the morning.
Oh, thank you so much. And as always, to my listeners, including Kathryn, thank you for joining me here on Your Daily Writing Habit, where I am helping you write and finish writing, that's the important part, an awesome book. And please drop by my Inc. Authors group on Facebook to connect with other authors like yourself. That will be in the show notes as well. Until tomorrow, happy writing.